As many of you know, some of the members of our community recently participated in the filming of a documentary about the Flat Earth movement called Behind the Curve. If you've watched it, you know that we are not represented in the most positive light. We were made to look mentally unstable, ignorant, uneducated, and like social outcasts. This is not an uncommon tactic used by those who give no credence to Flat Earth and its proponents and who have done no research into the subject on their own. Even I was recently interviewed by the BBC in a piece called The Why Factor as part of a quote-unquote Beyond Fake News series, where they chopped up my interview and interlaced it in between interviews done with professional magicians who are also psychologists to try to make it seem as though people who do not follow the mainstream narrative are simply fooled or manipulated into doing so. They accuse us of confirmation bias, even though as flat earthers, or ball earth skeptics, we all got here by trying to debunk the flat earth. They also talk about how psychologists know that if you are told something is true by someone in a position of authority, you're more likely to believe it. This is the same angle they use over and over again to try to discredit critical thinkers. Unfortunately, Bob and Jeran were the two who were the most egregiously misrepresented people in the documentary. They were also the only two people who were discussing anything observation-related. Their clips were creatively edited in such a way to make them look as if they themselves debunked Flat Earth. This is absolutely ridiculous. The worst part is that many of the people who believe this nonsense are Flat Earthers. I have to say I am disappointed by this. For hundreds of years, no one has been able to produce an experiment or observation that empirically proves the Earth's motion, and yet you are convinced by this clip from a film made by a biased globe believer that this is true. What happened to your critical thought? Anyway, I have here a short clip from Globebusters where Bob gets to explain his side.
All right, so getting back to what I was saying, as far as you know, my observations of these people that are coming onto my channel and in my comments section, and I'm sure that most flat earthers are getting this nonsense of oh, Globebusters, you know, prove the curvature and the rotation. The thing that absolutely blows me away is that this shows the utter desperation, guys, the utter desperation of the globe earth believers, because they are getting annihilated in debate. They are getting annihilated with proofs. They will not and do not go out and do any experiments that are showing conclusively that there is curvature, unless you want to, you know, call what Soundly does. Well, it's not an experiment, but it's a ridiculous observation that he draws entirely incorrect conclusions from. They are not doing anything like this, unlike, you know, the flat earthers, what Jeran was attempting to do, what FE Core and Rick in particular was trying to do with the fiber optic gyro, what Dr. John D is trying to do in his experiments. We'll be covering that a little bit later on in the show. We are absolutely killing these people, and all they can say is refraction, bruh, refraction. You know, and not only that, they've got the entire model of refraction wrong, backwards, completely backwards. It would work far better on a concave Earth than on the convex one, but you know, that's a whole nother story. But so they come in and, you know, they're proof, and they're absolutely rejoicing with glee, because now all of a sudden Globebusters and Jeranism have credibility, because of a complete misunderstanding of what they heard on Behind the Curve. They completely misunderstood what I said when I made it very clear that, you know, somebody else had done the test. I did use the term we, absolutely yes, but that's only because, like I said, in the context of FE Core, Rick is a member of FE Core. FE Core, by the way, did not purchase this gyro or anything like this. It was a private party individual all the way. We discussed it, you know, for quite some time, but you know, that's the whole thing. They completely took what I said out of context, then claimed that I proved the motion and rotation of the Earth, which was utterly wrong. And all you have to do is go back and listen to it very carefully. But that just shows, like I said, the utter desperation that the ballers have. I mean, they got nothing. They've got absolutely nothing, and you know they got nothing when they are citing flat earthers for their proof of rotation and curvature of the Earth. Why do they do that? Because no scientist ever in the history of mankind has ever measured rotation or motion of this Earth. No scientist or anybody in the history of mankind has ever measured curvature on this Earth, right? So the fact that they claim that Jeran and I are doing this is so comical. It's over the top. Go ahead.
Right. I was just going to say that, I did a video this week called Quotes That Tell Us That We've Been Lied To, and there's so many quotes in there, and you've got Einstein saying that there's no experiment on Earth that can prove that the Earth moves, except for Bob. Bob's the only, I think that's the end of that quote that was left out, that Bob's the only one that can do, and, Einstein couldn't do it, but Bob could. So, yeah, it's certainly incredible.
Yeah, and I didn't even do it. That's the funniest part of all, is I didn't even do it. I have never laid hands on a fiber optic gyro. I simply commented on it. I reported it. But, when you're desperate for proof, when you're a baller and you are so desperate for proof that you have got to completely, compound a lie upon another lie to claim, and then use a flat earther's evidence, supposed evidence, as your proof for the ball. Wow. It kind of reminds me of, I was watching a Mr. Thrive and Survive hangout last night, and it was so funny because Rich was talking about EQ mount telescopes, and lo and behold, who is in there absolutely trying to convince him that no, it's all legitimate. The EQ mount will only work on a ball, and Rich was just destroying him. But it was Astronomy Live, and of course, I'm sure you guys know who Astronomy Live is. And I was just sitting there heckling him, saying, astronomy is pseudoscience, because it is, because you can't measure anything like that. And of course, his only rebuttal to me was, oh, well, yeah, says the person that proves the rotation of the globe, right? That's all he had, absolutely all he had. And then I just said, well, you know what? It looks to me like, it's pretty crazy that you would be sitting here trying to convince a bunch of flat earthers of the globe Earth model. And here you are desperately trying to convince Rich that it's all true and it's all real and everything that you've observed is real. I mean, it's like, really, where do these people get off doing this?
And here in Argentina, the supposedly that you proved the rotation of the Earth, it was based like a $20,000 gyroscope.
Yeah. And like I said, I believe that I was guilty of misspeaking of that. Like I said, Rick said he was either 12 or 14, and I can't remember what he told me, but it was not $20,000. We make that perfectly clear, but it was either 12 or 14. And have been Globebuster shows that I actually showed the specification and the model number specifically of what Rick had. And of course, now another thing that they did not talk about, and this was also sent to Daniel, people, is the fact that, I was talking about how we were talking about possibly encasing the fiber optic gyro in bismuth to see if that made any difference. Of course, that turned out to be a little bit too cumbersome and expensive, but Rick did buy a Helmholtz coil, and he also bought a zero Gauss chamber, and the zero Gauss chamber is basically kind of a magnetic free type of zone. The zero Gauss chamber did not make any difference. However, the Helmholtz coil, which basically allows you to direct I guess, kind of a collimated EM beam, when he fired that thing up and put it in the proximity of the fiber optic gyro, guess what it did? It zeroed out the gyro on all three axes. In other words, it essentially shut it down, meaning that the gyro was not picking up any internal rotation, but rather an energetic rotation around it. And we're going to prove that again by going back and revisiting here in a little bit the Michelson-Gale experiment, the idea that there is an ether. And of course, a lot of people will then come back and say, well, there really is no such thing as the ether. Einstein proved it. And it's like, no, Einstein didn't prove anything of the sort. In fact, we have equipment today that depends on the existence of the ether, and that is indeed the fiber optic and ring laser gyros themselves, which depend on something that is called the Sagnac effect, which depends on the ether keeping a consistent speed of the light that propagates through it. But again, we'll cover that a little bit later. But that information, all of that information, the explanation was sent to Daniel, the technical breakdown, all of it, I sent in a very long letter and an accompanying video explaining it to them long before, long before the movie was ever released. In fact, it was, I think, probably the week after I had disclosed the results on Globebusters, right? But again, they chose not to use it, and they chose not to use it, and that tells you right there that they had no interest in trying to justify any of the science that the flat earthers were doing, and certainly not any science that would at least give a little bit of credibility to the experiments that we did. So, there you have it.
The thing is, though, is they're not going to win this argument, or they're not going to win a debate with facts or proofs or evidence. There's no way. They don't have a leg to stand on in that regard. And so really the only thing they can do is misrepresent us and attack our character, our integrity, our intelligence, our sanity. But they have nothing when it comes to facts or actual science.
No. Hey, Bob, when you talk about a 15-degree-per-hour rotation too, is that from anywhere on Earth that it always shows up the same, or do you have to input into the specs of the gyro your latitude? Because I've looked online a few times at different ring laser gyros, and they all seem to be a computer program to where this gyro sits there, but then all the results are returned through a computer processor. Is that kind of the one that he has?
Well, first of all, I have to make a distinction here. What Rick bought was called a fiber optic gyro.
Okay, thank you.
And a fiber optic gyro works. They work virtually identically in principle. The difference of them is that a fiber optic gyro actually propagates the light around in a circle through fiber optic tubes, right? Whereas a ring laser gyro propagates it in a kind of a vacuum area with mirrors, and it's more or less free space, you would call it, okay? So the thing with the ether rotation is, yes, depending on where you are, what latitude you are on the Earth, there's going to be a difference in the rate of ether rotation, okay? So just like it would be if the Earth was actually spinning. But what the inertial reference system in like these big Boeing airliners and the Airbuses and stuff like that, they use a ring laser gyro as part of the inertial reference system. And part of the calibration is that they have to, have the plane very still so that the fiber optic gyro, or the ring laser gyro, excuse me, in this case, detects a very precise rate of rotation at that latitude. And then it makes the appropriate corrections, because the fiber optic gyro or the ring laser gyro is actually an extremely precise type of instrument. But it doesn't work in the same sense as a normal gyroscope does. A normal gyroscope works based on inertia, right? And the fiber optic gyro works based on a laser interferometer and phase differentials. So I've given technical breakdowns of it before. I'll do it a little bit more today. But so what the inertial reference system does then is it takes that etheric motion, even though they're going to call it Earth rotation, of course they're going to call it that, and they simply calibrate it into the latitude and longitude that you feed into the inertial reference system, and it becomes a very, very precise guidance system, okay? So, a lot of it's done with computers, but in this case, the fiber optic gyro that Rick had is not really computer driven as far as any of the results that come out of it. Rick was looking at strictly the raw data that was coming out of it. And of course, because of the way it works and because of the fact that it works on the Sagnac effect and based on an etheric wind, that motion is always going to be there. And again, we've covered this, with the failure of the Michelson-Morley experiment, with the supporting evidence of Airy's failure, yada, yada, yada. So that's kind of your answer.
All right, yeah.
And in this clip from Jeranism Raw, Jeran explains what happened with his clip in the documentary.
All right. So let me talk about Behind the Curve, and I'm going to mention a few people throughout this that make sure everybody knows who I'm talking about. The producers of the movie, which I believe are from the company Delta V, are Caroline Clark and Daniel Clark, who, once I found out both their last names, I said, hey, I didn't know you guys were, what are you, brother and sister, husband and wife? No, they told me that they have no relation. So that may be true. Just what a weird coincidence to have the two producers of the movie with the same last name, even though they have no relation. Could be true, could not. Just thought it was an interesting little tidbit. So if I refer to Daniel or Caroline, you will know who I'm talking about. So the story begins with me getting a phone call from, I don't remember if it was Caroline or Daniel, but basically somebody called me and said, hey, we hear you're doing an experiment over at a canal somewhere in California. We would love to come film it. And I said, oh, that would be awesome. I said, I was trying to worry about how I'm going to film it. And they said, oh, no, we got a whole camera crew. We got lights. We got all this equipment. And so we would love to come film it. My opinion was at that time, how awesome is that? I wouldn't have to worry about filming it. I would have a documentary crew, camera crew that would be filming it for me. That sounded perfect to me. And so we went out there the first time and we tried to do the tests as I described on Globebusters. Maybe you've seen the movie, but the expander, which is a metal, kind of expander beam that screws onto the top of the laser. One thing that we had never tested was leaving that on there while the power was on the laser, because when you get one of those lasers, if you've ever used one, and I don't remember if we used a 3-watt or a 5-watt, whatever it was, one of the rules or one of the warnings on those things is to not leave them on very long because they get extremely, excuse me, frog in my throat, they get extremely hot. And so, I would turn it on for 30 seconds and turn it off and make sure that it never got too hot. But when we were out there that actual night doing the observation, we were trying to move the laser from 4 miles away and get somebody on the other end to see it. It was extremely difficult because if I barely nudged the laser on my side a little bit, it would move, some 10 feet or something down 4 miles away. So it was very difficult, but a lot of the time we had to have the laser on. Well, at one point it was probably on for 2 minutes or so, and I realized, I got to turn that off. I turned it off. And then when we couldn't get the beam down enough, I needed to adjust the beam expander. Well, trying to do that, I realized, oh shit, this thing is melted on here. So the actual beam expander was melted to the laser itself. It couldn't come off anymore. So that created a lot of problems. It was pretty upsetting. And then we went to the North Carolina conference. Also, Daniel and Caroline both went to that conference. I was mic'd up for a majority of the day I spoke. None of that footage appeared in the documentary. And also when they came by my house to speak to me, and that was just Daniel by himself, he came by, talked to me in my house for quite a long time. A lot of that didn't appear in the movie as well. We talked on the porch for a little bit. I was kind of showing him the laser and what we were going to be doing. One of the things that I was upset about in watching that movie was there was one scene, and I'll just show you real quick. I don't want to do too much because Daniel and Caroline will surely strike me if I show any portion of that video, so I'll make sure that I don't do that. But where is... Okay, hold on. Okay. So you may have seen this scene in the movie. It just flipped real quick to this scene after I was talking. They were on my porch, and we were talking about these lasers, and then I said, a laser that you would use for a cat is around... a certain level, and this one's this much more. And then they show this scene. The scene just cuts to this, and these cats are running around, and this house is held up by some sort of cinder blocks or whatever. But this is my neighbor's house, and I thought that was pretty dirtball of them to make it look like it certainly appeared in the movie. I would think anybody who watched it would think that this was my house, and it certainly is not my house. So, I was upset about that part to start, but then more upset was the fact that after everything was said and done, so we're talking about both experiments are complete, and when I say both, it's because we went back out a second time to again try the observation. And originally when I walked away from the second observation, I was upset at myself more than anything. The reason for that is because, and I even remember apologizing to Daniel because they had come out 2 times, the camera crew, and one time we had an equipment malfunction, and the second time we couldn't keep the proper beam diameter. So I said to him, I'm sorry, I was upset because I thought it would be easy for them, and in all honesty, to show that our experiment failed and how silly we looked doing so. So I really thought the whole time after they left, I'm like, man, this is going to be pretty shitty when the movie comes out, because if anything, they're just going to show, hey, here's Jeran, and he couldn't complete this experiment. That's what I thought. So I was telling myself at the time, if I would have done some pre-tests to make sure the observation would work, that I could have possibly protected myself from being used in a movie to show flat earthers at times failed experiments, which is what actually happened to us, right? So what I never considered at any time is that they would be able to take out a piece of the observations that we made that evening and be able to twist it in a way that would, instead of showing the truth, that really our experiment failed in a few different ways, that instead it worked and showed the curvature of the Earth. I mean, I was never for a moment even concerned about that possibility because it's a blatant lie. And, you know, how convenient for Daniel and Caroline that now that the movie is done and now that they have blatantly lied about my experiment, that all of a sudden they have to go back on their word and not allow me to have the other footage. So what I was getting at before is when I spoke to them after that final experiment, I said, hey, can I get some footage? Because if people remember, I did a couple lead-up videos to the fact that we were going to do this observation, told my subscribers, told my channel about it. Then we went out and did the observation, and then I went back and asked them, hey, can I have some of that footage so that I can show people the observations that we made and that we were out at the canal and this and that? And they said, oh, you know what, we're really sorry, but until we sell the movie, we don't know who we're going to sell it to. And until we sell the movie, we can't give out any of the footage. I said, well, how long is that going to take? And they said, we don't know. You know, it could be 6 months, could be a year. So I was pretty upset, but I said, well, you know what? Eventually, and I thought it would be kind of funny if a bunch of Globers all got on their little high horse and said, Jeran never did this experiment. He never did. I said, that's fine. I don't care if it waits a year. When I finally come out and say, hey, here's the footage. It was filmed by this, this documentary crew, that they would all look like idiots and have egg on their face because obviously we did the experiment and we did the observation that night. Well, this is what happened. The next thing that I hear is when they finally, sell the movie. I think I heard that it was going to come out on iTunes or whatever. Then I contacted them and said, hey, can I get that footage now? It's a year later, and you guys told me I could have it. And they said, oh, we're so sorry. The contractual obligations that are part of the selling of the movie say that we can't give out any of the other footage. So at this point, now I'm upset. Now I'm like, oh, wait a second. You told me that I'd be able to see some of this footage. And remember, at this point, I still have not seen the movie. I think I saw a bootleg version, and I heard, Mark Sargent and, Patricia Steer, a couple other people telling me about it, and they told me that it ended with a scene with me saying interesting. I couldn't even remember what they were talking about because, again, we're talking about an experiment from a year before. And I don't want to call it an experiment. We were trying to make an observation. That's what we were trying to do. So I was upset and said, man, how could they go back on their word and say, now I can't have this footage? Well, when I finally saw the film, that's when I realized, oh, now I see why you won't let me have any of the footage, because the footage that you have, the additional footage, would prove exactly what I've said or what I will say in this movie, which is that they pulled an out-of-sequence, small little observation from the middle of everything and placed it at the end of their movie as if it proved something. And again, there was people there. There's probably 20 people there, maybe 25 at the most. And of those, there was probably 3 Globe believers. One in particular, I can't remember his name, but he kind of was right behind me the whole time. And all of us, and I'm talking all 25 of us, walked away from that experiment or that observation at the end of that night and said nothing was proven. Nothing could have been, nothing was like replicated or duplicated. We weren't seeing consistent results. There was a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so, all of a sudden, when I see how they ended that movie, I'm like, oh man, these guys are dishonest as it gets. And so since then, I've been trying to get them to either write a statement. We've gone back and forth in emails, and I'll actually read you an email that I sent to them when we get back from break. And then also it's basically the email of me asking them to make the statement that I give them. So I give them a statement. They refuse. They say they're not going to read that statement. And then they finally write back their official statement. And again, when I read these both, so you'll hear my statement and then you'll hear theirs, you'll see the problem that, number one, they won't dare mention that they promised to give me any of the footage, even though they actually did. This is all really upsetting for me because one of the things that happened is when we went to North Carolina, I was one of the very few people that had yet to sign the contract or whatever, basically giving them rights to what they filmed. And the reason I didn't sign it is because I was worried. I said, I don't know if I can trust these guys to portray the Flat Earth community correctly. But, I talked to Mark Sargent. He said, well, they came over and just filmed me talking, seemed fine. Patricia said the same thing. Bob said the same thing. Yeah, they just came over and filmed me. They were, they seem like great people. They seem like they're on the up and up. And in North Carolina, both Daniel and Caroline took me aside separately and said, hey, we'd really like you to sign this, and that we really want to portray the Flat Earth movement in all honesty. We want to do this on the up and up. We want to do this in all truth. And I bought in. And I said, okay, sounds like these guys want to do a good job, that they want to make a good movie, and I want to contribute. So I signed it, and the rest is history. So so when we get back from a break here shortly, I'll go into a little bit more detail, and then I'll read those two statements. But what was really scary is, when I realized that even if I did a successful test or a successful observation, and we showed something incredible, that they could have done the exact same thing. So that's the worst part about it, is I was beating myself up for a year saying, man, if I just would have made sure that we touched on, we dotted all our I's and crossed our T's, and that, everything, we went out there before and actually made sure the observation was the way we expected it to be, that they would come out and film that. But now I realize that even if that was the case, they still could have taken any part that they wanted. Me saying, interesting, and put that at the end of the movie as if it proved anything. So it wouldn't have mattered that even if our observation showed flat Earth results and could be duplicated, that they could have taken any part of that observation and spun it in the way that they did. So now I have a whole new perspective, and I learn from my mistakes, and I should have had somebody there filming every second that they were filming me, and I will do that in the future.
Are any of you surprised at how they represent us? I know a lot of you say this is why we shouldn't talk to the media, but these are also the same people who say we need to be spreading the truth and talking about it as much as we can. We all knew this wasn't going to be easy. We all knew that they would fight us every step of the way. So what should we do? Hide in our little corner of YouTube like some freak show side attraction? We have to start somewhere. Sure, they may try to make us look stupid and all stand around and laugh while they claim we debunked ourselves, but we aren't going away. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and those who laughed will eventually have to ask themselves why we are still here. Why haven't we disappeared into the fray? I'll just close with this. The saying which really applies here is, the shit just got real. Everything changes once the volume gets loud enough. The doc technically came out last April, and general release started in November, in which everyone had access to it. Now, however, it's gotten popular, which few thought would happen. That kicks in a huge amount of extra criticism, and of course all the armchair quarterbacks. Monday mornings are the worst for the NFL because every fan thinks they could have done it better. Yes, there will be some division, some because of the critics, some because of jealousy, some because of suspicion. Are any of these people going to give up flat Earth? Hell no. Why would they? All of these groups want it to be better, and from that they will try harder. Chaos is part of any war, and that is what we are in. The enemy isn't helpless. We'll take the hits and be stronger for it. The best fights, the most satisfying victories, are against something formidable. I fight because I believe, and the truth is the banner I carry. Long live Flat Earth. Mark Sargent.